Hi, I'm Tyler Gross, and this is going to be my social work Shero presentation. So, most of the information on Frances Perkins in here in this vlog is going to be from francisperkinscenter.org, which is basically a website dedicated to sort of preserving the legacy of Frances Perkins, who is my social work Shero. Frances Perkins was born in the year 1880 in Boston under the name Fanny Coralie Perkins. She would change her name to Frances in 1905, likely as a way of claiming some independence from her very conservative parents. One of the things that would end up shaping her career as an activist and advocate would be her disgust with the lack of regulation that characterized early 20th century capitalism. In her final semester attending Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, she took a class in American economic history regarding the expansion of industrial capitalism in England and America. As one of her assignments, she was required to observe what the working conditions were like in the mills running along the Connecticut River. Perkins deemed immoral the fact that women and children had to work very long and hard hours in factories, and that, quote, there were absolutely no effective laws that regulated the number of hours they were permitted to work. There were no provisions which guarded their health nor adequately looked after their compensation in case of injury. Perkins would also proclaim that she was, quote, inspired with the idea of reforming, or at least doing what she could to help change those abuses. Frances Perkins was a left-leaning progressive. Unlike many of her conservative counterparts, she believed that government did have a role to play in the betterment of people's lives. Perkins argued that, quote, the people are what matter to government, and a government should aim to give all the people under its jurisdiction the best possible life. Perkins' belief that government could and should play a major positive role in people's lives was certainly to a great extent the thing that informed and characterized much of her work as an advocate and activist. One of the many reasons I think that Frances Perkins embodied social work values was her willingness to take a stand against power on behalf of working people. For example, in the midst of the Great Depression in January 1930, President Hoover and his administration were optimistic, wrongly. Hoover proclaimed that unemployment was down and that economic recovery was well within reach. Perkins, however, called a press conference during which she argued that this was not at all the case. She presented data from the New York Bureau of Labor Statistics which indicated that employment was on the decline. Her challenges to the optimism of the Hoover administration would gain a great deal of press coverage, and she would continue to present to the public statistics that contradicted statements from Hoover's administration. In 1933, Frances Perkins became the first woman to serve in an American president's cabinet. The position of Labor Secretary was offered to Perkins by President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and she accepted his offer only after he agreed to a list of demands, which included a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, abolition of child labor, direct federal aid to states for unemployment relief, Social Security, a revitalized federal employment service, and universal health insurance. In the Roosevelt administration's first 100 days, Frances Perkins was asked, among other things, to devise a plan for a program that would provide emergency relief. In doing so, she called upon Harry Hopkins, a young social worker from New York who had visited Perkins with a proposal of his own for such a program. Perkins and Hopkins both played an integral role in the establishment of the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, which would be headed by Hopkins. Also significantly, when FDR was preparing to present the National Industrial Recovery Act to Congress, Perkins was able to convince him that $3.3 billion from this legislation should be dedicated to public works. Because Perkins was a member of the Special Board for Public Works, Perkins was able to see to it that allocated funds were used on projects that would benefit working people. This included things like schools, roads, highways, housing projects, and post offices. Frances Perkins also came up with the main idea for what was perhaps the most important piece of legislation to come out of the Roosevelt administration, the Social Security Act of 1935. This legislation would help to provide old age pensions, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and aid to the disabled and poor. Perkins devised this legislation as the appointed head of a committee on economic security. Through her advocacy efforts, Perkins also played a major role in the enactment of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which banned child labor, established maximum working hours, and established a minimum wage. When President Roosevelt died in 1945, only 2 cabinet members had served for the entire duration of his presidency, and Frances Perkins was one of them. This also made her the longest-serving labor secretary in American history. In 1944, Collier's magazine article suggested that the previous 12 years had seen, quote, not so much the Roosevelt New Deal as the Perkins New Deal. In these 12 years, Perkins had accomplished all the items on her initial list of demands from FDR, except for one, and that was universal health care, a piece of progressive social legislation that our country has yet to enact to this day. Again, the information from this vlog is information that I summarized from a website called francisperkinscenter.org, and it's a great website. You should definitely check it out. But thanks for watching.